What's up, AGB? I am so excited today. We have Brooke Martinez, owner of Compass Nutrition, a longtime friend of mine, and someone who's going to bring so much knowledge to our AGB community. I am so excited to introduce to you Brooke Martinez. What is up? Welcome to the group.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. So Brooke is specifically here to talk about nutrition, right? And what that is like in terms of being an athlete, right? How do we eat like an athlete? Why should we eat a certain way to maximize our playing potential and everything we're trying to do? Parents, this is going to be a great one to listen to as well. Coaches as well. But Brooke, give us a little intro for those who don't know you. Just a little background on who is Brooke Martinez and why did
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. So I have been in the nutrition realm since I was about 19 years old. About 7, 8 years now. And my journey started with bodybuilding as my sport. That's kind of what really dove me into, learning about nutrition, understanding nutrition. I worked with my first nutrition coach and had an experience with that. And it made me really want to help general wellness and athletes with understanding what nutrition looks like in a healthy way, because I think there's so much confusing information out there, and really when you break it down to just the science and what different nutrients do for your body based on different goals that you have, it makes it just a lot more simple. It doesn't need to be about this specific food or that specific food. What it comes down to is understanding, okay, for my sport or for my weight loss goal or for whatever it may be, this is how it makes sense for me to fuel myself. So I think that just breaking it down to a more simple place and not getting caught up in all of the craziness of the different trends is super helpful for people. I know it's been helpful for me over, the past 7 years, and I've got to see a lot of cool results with different clients. I went to school at Winona State. My degree is exercise physiology, and then I dove into the nutrition side with certifications. So I have a couple different nutrition certifications, one of them being certified sports nutrition coach. So that's been really fun to get that deeper understanding of what works for athletes and how athletes should be eating. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
I love it. And I can attest to Brooke's format for wanting to keep things simple, but then also not losing that flavor and deliciousness. And I've tried a few of Brooke's homemade dishes when I've had the opportunity to visit, and just like seeing your progression and the results you bring others. It's astonishing to see what you've done. And I'm just like so excited because AGB is going to be working with Brooke over the foreseeable future. We have a lot of cool new things under working, but this is the first one, and Brooke's here to talk to us about eating like an athlete. So, without further ado, Brooke, let's get into it.
Awesome. So here's a general overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We have general nutrition, specifically pre, intra, post workout nutrition, game day nutrition, and then nutrition for injured athletes. We have a little bit more content in there, but those are the key things that we're going to be going over today that are super pertinent for athletes in their regular life and, in season. So to start out, a lot of us know the term calories, right? But a lot of us don't, I think, fully understand how applicable this is for athletes. So athletes are told their whole life, you need to eat, you need to eat, you need to eat. But it can be really mentally exhausting, especially if you're someone who doesn't have a big appetite, but you're always being told that you need to eat more. So I think that understanding why people are telling you to eat, and it goes beyond just gaining size based on whatever your sport is. That's a lot of times why people are told that they need to eat, but it goes way beyond that, because we have to think similar to a car getting gas. Your body needs calories in order for it to perform and function. So calories are just units of energy. A lot of times we make it a fancier thing than it is. It's our body's way of getting energy. If you don't have enough energy, then you're not going to perform well. Simple as that. So based on your, your height, your weight, your age, your gender, all that stuff plays a role in what your calorie demands are, on top of, the specific sport that you're doing. So, you're going to have probably different caloric needs if you're a basketball player than if you are a runner. There's just different training loads with those things. And then your physical activity outside of your sport. So maybe, you're in a high school athlete, but you also have a job working on a farm or something, and you're super active that way. But maybe you're a high school athlete who is pretty sedentary outside of your sport, so there's going to be different needs based on that, because our bodies don't just see, oh, they're specifically doing, in practice right now, they need more food, or they're specifically doing this. Our bodies look at your total energy expenditure throughout the day, and they have, requirements based on that. Um, and then, whether you have a desire to maybe get leaner for your season, or to put on some muscle for your season, or just maintain where you're at, all these things play a role in how many calories, you should be consuming, in order to be getting where you want to be.
Oh,
So our calories come from food, and different foods are going to have, more or less, right? And so a caloric surplus, that term simply means that you're consuming more calories than you're expending. So if you're in a time of wanting to build muscle, say it's off season, and you really want to put on some muscle going into, be prepared for your next season, you're going to want to be in a caloric surplus. So you're taking in more calories than you're expending. Okay. And so, but on the same token, if you have a goal of getting a little bit leaner for your season, then you don't want to be in a caloric surplus, because when we're taking in more calories than we're expending, and we're not training the right way, then that can also lead to, gaining maybe unwanted body fat. So something that you really want to be aware of there. Caloric deficit. So that's when we are taking in fewer calories than we're expending. And if you're in season as an athlete, I, would make the argument that you should never be in a caloric deficit, but especially with high school and college athletes, it is so common to be in a caloric deficit, simply because your needs are so great that it can be really hard to reach that goal. So you might not be trying to be in a caloric deficit. You might not be wanting to lose weight, but without really understanding what your body's caloric needs are, it could be really easy for you to be in a caloric deficit without realizing it. And I would say that's probably, gosh, close to 90% of high school boys specifically, just because you are burning so many calories throughout the day. So it's something to be really aware of. And then maintenance calories. So all that's looking at is you're eating the same amount that you're expending. So if you're burning 3,000 calories a day, you're consuming 3,000 calories a day. Now, it's probably pretty difficult for the majority of high school or college students or athletes, to even be at maintenance calories, because again, when you're between the high school college age as an athlete, your needs are so great that just getting at the maintenance is challenging, let alone if you're trying to build muscle or really have a lot in the tank, like extra calories, extra carbohydrates in the tank to perform. Your needs are going to be even greater than that. So again, understanding why, I think, makes it a lot easier to make that happen. And it's probably not easy as, a high school or college athlete, because you're busy, but it really makes an impact. So again, there can be a time and a place for all three of those things. Maybe you're in a spot where you want to build muscle. Okay, caloric surplus, that's where you should be at. If you're in a spot where you want to trim a little bit up for your season, maybe a caloric deficit. And then maybe you're at a super good spot, you just want to work on your athletic performance and make sure you're getting enough for your body's demands. Maintenance calories are a good spot to be at. And I'm not one to necessarily, encourage counting calories for, high school athletes. But it can be an interesting thing to do for a week, just, logging your food for a week, seeing on average how many calories you're consuming a week. If you're way under what your body needs, then it could be as simple as adding in, a couple snacks throughout the day, having a bigger breakfast, lunch, and dinner, just so that your body's getting enough. So it can be as detailed and as intense or as laid back as you want it to be. But it's not one of those things where ignorance is bliss if you want to be performing and feeling your best.
Well, you just took my question, Brooke, about like, so when working with clients or athletes, do you suggest tracking both how many calories we're burning and how much we're eating? And you kind of
Yeah.
answer that, but
Yeah, no, yeah, and that specifically is a great question. So, with anyone that I work with, I want to first figure out what their estimated daily calorie burn is. And so I like to use the Mifflin equation for that. And that can be really simple for someone to just look up on the internet. They have formulas that you can just plug your information in. I think that all it requires is your gender, your age, your height, your weight, and then it gives you kind of a breakdown of physical activity. So you look through and see which one you're closest to, and you put that number in there, and it'll give you kind of your estimated daily calorie burn. Obviously, there's going to be a range there from the lower side to the higher side, and with that, you just know, okay, on the days that I'm a little more active, I need to eat a little bit more. On the days that I'm less active, eat a little bit less. Pretty simple there. Depending on the person's goal, I will have them, track their calories, their macronutrients, which we'll get into in a little bit. But I think that for high schoolers, or college students, you guys already have so much on your plate that adding something in like that could be a lot. And you really can do it in a more simple way than that. So I think that, being aware, taking a week to track, and then maybe, you make adjustments to your diet, whether it be, again, adding in those snacks or bigger meals. And then, 4 weeks later, you track again, see if you're closer to what your estimated daily calorie burn is.
love that. And I'll make sure we link that Mifflin calorie tracker
Yeah,
to
perfect.
get that for anyone.
Awesome. So I really like this graph here because I think it does such a good job of showing the consequences of anyone who is continuously in a calorie deficit. So again, there's a time and a place for a calorie deficit, but if you're in a season, that is not the time or place unless you're in a specific weight restricted sport such as wrestling or Olympic lifting, something along those lines. There's, you got to do things a little bit differently. But when it comes to, things like football and basketball and volleyball, we really want to make sure that you're in that maintenance to surplus range so that you're not experiencing any of these health consequences. And these aren't going to happen overnight. It's one of those things where it's over time. If you're, say, for 6 months you're continuously not getting enough for your body's demands, these are some of the consequences that you could experience. And it's going to be different from person to person. Females specifically are at a much greater risk of some of those things, just because our hormones do not like when there's a continuous caloric deficit. So we can be affected in a little bit more severe ways when it comes to like your menstrual cycle and bone density and all that stuff. So as a female, super important. But I mean, as males too, there's so much there. So if we're looking at your performance consequences alone, increased risk of injury, decreased training response, impaired judgment. That's not a good thing if you're in a sport where you need to make those really quick decisions like basketball. Decreased coordination, decreased concentration, irritability, depression, decreased muscle strength. There's so many things there that as an athlete, you really don't want to be happening. And so I think that this image does such a good job of showing, yeah, when we say to make sure that you're eating enough, we're not just saying it to say it. We're saying it because there's a reason why, and there's proven performance consequences on top of all of the health consequences that can come from continuously not getting enough food for the amount of energy that you're expending. Your immune system is going to take a hit. Your hormones are going to take a hit. Your metabolism is going to take a hit. Your growth and development, not something that a guy wants to hear, when he's in high school, that because he's not eating enough, that could mess with that. Psychological, cardiovascular, there's really not an area of your health and wellness and performance that's not impacted by continuously under eating. And I can speak from experience as bodybuilding. It was my freshman year of college, and I couldn't even function when I was in school. Like I had to have conversations with my professors, like, I am so sorry. I'm normally such a good student. I can't think. And that was super uncommon for me. I was always like really, top of class, work really hard, but I'd be taking exams and it'd just be blank. And that only happened my freshman year when I was bodybuilding and in such a long-term caloric deficit. So it definitely will take a hit on your school and on how you're feeling in practice and just how you're experiencing life in general, which is the most important thing too.
Yeah, love had that, like, nutrition impacting how we just experience life in general.
Yeah.
So quickly on that, like, once you started becoming aware that you were in a caloric deficit, for too long is impacting other things. What was like some immediate steps that like you took or athletes can take once they start to
Yeah.
become aware that like, hey, I'm being impacted by my nutrition right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that first and foremost, you want to work on getting out of that caloric deficit. So, say that you're an athlete who, you just really don't like eating, you're always busy. Maybe you track your food for a week and on average you're eating like 1200 calories a day. Well, you might panic and think, "Oh, gosh, now that I understand this, I got to jack my calories way up." Well, that's not necessarily what you want to do right away just because your body isn't used to that. So that could really mess with your digestion. You could experience, unwanted weight gain from that, feeling sluggish. So what you want to do, it's called reverse dieting. So I take so many clients through this process because a lot of people, especially athletes, are under eating. And what we do with that is look at, okay, what's their body currently used to? Let's increase their total calories by anywhere from 10 to 20%, just based on wherever it is that they're at and what their goals are and everything. So we do a slow, controlled increase and let their body adapt to that, get used to eating more, get used to functioning with a little bit more fuel, get used to metabolizing all of that extra food. And then once they're feeling good at that spot and that doesn't feel like so much work, then you can do another increase. And you just slowly keep doing that until, that athlete or person is at maintenance calories or in a caloric surplus based on whatever it is that their goals are. But it can be really defeating for someone to try to go from 1200 calories to 2000 calories. It's going to feel impossible. And then they might just quit and be like, forget it. I can't do this. It's too much. So I have noticed that those slow increases, they make it feel doable. And that's what we want, especially for, our high school and college athletes that already are so busy with things. You don't want someone to hit a wall with it and then give up on it. So slowly increasing is one of the best things that you can do in that kind of situation.
Love that. And anyone out there listening, and this maybe sound like something that you're going through, you want to go through, and you want that accountability. I couldn't recommend Brooke more, or getting plugged in with an AGB community where we're all kind of walking through this growth mindset together. So awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brooke.
Yeah, absolutely. And calories they're much more than just this overall term. We break them down into three macronutrients. So the macronutrients are nutrients we need in macro or large amounts in order to function. And so we have protein, we have carbohydrates, and we have fats. And protein and carbohydrates, 1 gram of those equals 4 calories. For fats, 1 gram of fat equals 9 calories. So fats are more calorically dense, which is why, a lot of times you'll see that a serving of something might have 50 grams of carbs, but maybe 15 grams of fat. You could have a much higher carb or protein amount than fat, but calorically it could end up equaling the same amount because it's over double the caloric density, if that makes sense. So as athletes, the two main macronutrients that we want to focus on are protein and carbohydrates. Fats have their place, and if you're in a sport that is a little bit more little slower pace like running, then your needs for fats will be a little bit higher. But any of those sports that are go 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 high intensity, protein and carbohydrates are really the ones that we're going to want to be looking at. So we want to be, and we talked about this at the beginning, we want to be cautious with any diet or health influencers that preach to cut out whole food groups. I've certainly gotten sucked into that, and it's just not how our bodies are created to function. Obviously, there can be certain situations, different autoimmune conditions or health conditions where you need to severely reduce carbohydrates or protein or whatever. But those are case to case. And for the majority of healthy people, we want to be getting a balanced diet of protein, carbohydrates, and fats. They're called macronutrients for a reason. So for us to cut any of those out, is to basically say, I don't want this nutrient. This nutrient isn't going to be doing the function that it was created to do in my body. And as we dive a little bit more into what all three of these macronutrients do, the importance of them will start to, you'll see the importance of all of them. So
Yeah.
we're going to
And
go ahead.
just to jump in real quick, as we're jumping into this section, athletes, like, there's one thing that like I took the time to understand more. It'd be this concept of our macronutrients, right?
Yeah.
Understanding the ingredients and like what it does to your body. So looking at, whether it's an ingredient label or just like like setting up your week, so you're making sure you're getting in the key ingredients to perform. Like,
Mhm.
man, I wish I understood and took this part a little more serious, because then you can, like you said, keep it simple, set it up, and then you don't have to think about it as much. Once you kind of
Yeah.
get in the flow and you know which foods to be picking for, or which ones to be going for,
Yeah.
it makes it simpler. So love this.
Exactly.
Athletes, pay attention. This is the key to performing your body at its best right here.
Yeah. So protein is the one that I think we hear probably the most about as athletes. We know that it is important for, muscle, but it's important to understand all of the things that it does, because it's much more than that. And this is good for, I think, our parents to hear too, because I think sometimes, we have, if you have, high school boys, you think, oh, they need protein, but I don't. So I'll give them a good amount of chicken at dinner, but I don't need as much. Well, based on your goal, that might not be the case. So I think it's protein is one of those things that it makes me sad that so many people think that it's just this, all it is like this athlete macronutrient or bodybuilder macronutrient, because it is so much more. And so again, we'll get into that, but protein is king for longevity and feeling your best and looking your best and performing your best. So when we look at protein, it forms our muscle fibers, our tendons, our connective tissue, and our bones. So it's not a short list of things that it does. As physical activity increases, our protein needs increase, to a lot for increased muscle protein breakdown. So muscle protein breakdown, that's as you're exercising, you're doing damage to that muscle. And so if you're not getting enough protein in your diet to heal that and help that to grow stronger, then you're really going to be missing out on what you could be getting out of your physical activity. So we got to think, our times of being in practice or being in the weight room, that's when there's increased muscle protein breakdown there. And then when we're eating afterwards and we're sleeping, that's our opportunity to increase our muscle protein synthesis. And protein also supports our immune system. Obviously, that's an important thing for us to think about this time of year, and I think that really goes unnoticed. The role that protein has in your immune system, our hormones, and our metabolic rate. So for our immune system, it's highly dependent on protein because we have immunoglobulins that are antibodies made from amino acids, and they help us stay healthy through identifying foreign bacteria, viruses, and fungus. So if you're not getting enough protein on a day-to-day basis, then you're not going to be able to support your immune system how you want to. And this is really applicable as an athlete too, because nobody wants to miss practice or games because they're out sick. That shouldn't be happening. So you want to make sure that, think about, your body has all these different needs for protein on top of its needs for you performing well, and everything with recovering from practice. So we got to think, our bodies are going to look at, okay, what's the most important thing for me to put this dietary protein to right now, and it's going to allot that. So if you're around sick people all the time, and it's that time of year, then your body's probably going to prioritize your immune health. And so that means that whatever little protein is left over, that's probably going to be going to your hormones and your metabolic rate. It's not necessarily going to be going to enhancing your performance or to helping you recover, if that kind of makes sense. So our bodies are really smart. It'll identify what is the most important thing, and then make sure that need is met. But you might want it for recovering from a really hard week of practice. Well, our bodies aren't going to just do what we want with that. So that's why it's so important to get adequate amounts of protein, because there are so many needs in the body for it.
Love that.
So for hormones, we have a whole group of hormones made entirely of amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. Growth hormone is one. And growth hormone is so important as you're in high school and you're still growing and developing. And as an athlete too, growth hormone has so many benefits to it. It's critical for bone and muscle growth. It increases the usage of fat in our bodies through the process of stimulating the breakdown of triglycerides and adipocytes, which are fats either found in your blood or cells that store fat. So it's kind of a double whammy there. We want to be able to use stored fat in our body for fuel. A lot of us, because we eat such a high carbohydrate diet, so high in refined carbohydrates, we are not super good at accessing all the thousands of calories of fat. And that doesn't, you don't need to have a high body fat percentage to have thousands of calories of stored fat. We all do, no matter how skinny you are. We all have ample calories in fat stored in our body and our cells and our blood. And so we want to be able to tap into using those calories for energy if we need to. If maybe you're hitting the point in a game or in practice where your glycogen is running low, we want to be able to tap into those fats for fuel and be really fat adapted. That's going to be super helpful as an athlete. So growth hormone is super important for a lot of things, as you can see. So I was talking about, muscle protein synthesis, protein breakdown earlier. And this is a really nice image to see that a little bit more clearly, or understand that a little bit more. So when we have a higher muscle protein breakdown than we do muscle protein synthesis, we experience atrophy, or the loss of muscle mass. When our muscle protein synthesis is greater than our muscle protein breakdown, we experience hypertrophy, or the gain of muscle mass. And then when we're equal there, we experience maintaining muscle mass. So that's, when you see people that, they're gaining a lot of muscle mass, they're not outside of their intense lift. Maybe they have like a 2-hour lift, they're just getting after it. They're not probably going to be people that are successful are probably not going to be going for a super long, run or walk afterwards, or exerting a ton of physical activity or energy outside of that big lift, because we don't want muscle protein breakdown to be higher and higher. We want to, get the most out of, our lift, and then eat. So our muscle protein synthesis is greater than our muscle protein breakdown. And again, as your physical activity increases, muscle protein breakdown increases, and then your intake of protein needs to be higher, unless you're going to be experiencing atrophy.
Question for you, Brooke.
Yeah.
Protein powders in physical food versus powder. Does it
Yeah.
matter? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I am a big fan of high quality, like whey protein isolate would be my favorite option, just because it's easiest on digestion. It has the most protein, per serving. So I really like that one. But when it comes, it's one of those things where if you're really struggling to, like, say you're someone who, falls in the category of, you realize you've been under eating and that you need to eat more protein on a day-to-day basis, and it's really hard for you to have another serving of beef, or another serving of chicken, or another cup of Greek yogurt, or whatever,
Mhm.
it can be a really nice tool to have a protein powder that you can just quick drink before bed, or before practice or after practice or whatever, so that it doesn't feel like it's another thing that you need to sit down and eat, especially because, as an athlete, carbohydrate needs are really high too. So
Mhm.
it can be a super convenient thing. But if you easily are getting adequate protein through whole foods, perfect, that's awesome. It's one of those things that if you're really struggling with it, it's a really nice tool. But it is so important as an athlete to only get things that supplements that are third party tested. So that just means that they use a third party, like, informed choice, that they send their stuff to, and they test all the ingredients in there so that people know that what they say is in it, and you're not at risk as an athlete of consuming a banned substance. So, a lot of people, they want to go to Walmart quick for, you know, whatever cheapest protein powder there is. That is just not a wise thing to do in general, but especially as an athlete who, you don't want to be consuming anything that isn't approved for your sport.
Absolutely. Awesome. Okay.
Yeah. So I think this is super interesting, and it helps people to understand why you need to have such, you need to have adequate protein in your diet. Only 10% of dietary protein goes towards creating new muscle tissue. So that means that 90% of the protein that you're eating goes towards making enzymes, neurotransmitters, antibodies, nucleotides, and
Wow.
energy. So that just shows you, if you're eating 50 grams of protein per day, for example, and you're an athlete who's like having intense practices and long tournaments on the weekends and all that stuff, you're not going to be going your the protein you're consuming is not going to be going to probably making new muscle tissue, and the little bit that is, it's not going to probably be making a huge difference. So you really want to figure out what your protein needs are, and that's something that I do with clients, is help them figure out, okay, based on where they're at in their training, what their goals are, their size, all that stuff, how much protein do they need in order to not just be getting enough to cover their health and wellness bases, but to be building muscle and getting stronger. So we want to make sure that we're eating enough to support your body's functions. Pre-workout for nutrition. Oh, yeah. So if this is, I think, a helpful example I heard years ago. So if we look at someone who is eating just basically nothing healthy in their diet, right? Like they're skipping breakfast, and then maybe they're having a slice of pizza for lunch, and they're having McDonald's for dinner. Okay. They're hardly
Mhm.
getting any, like, micronutrients in their diet. and say they're investing in a pre-workout supplement that they're taking before they lift, the nutrients in that pre-workout, what should be going to getting them all amped up and getting them to respond really well to their lift, it's going to be functioning more as a multivitamin almost, because they are getting so few nutrients in their diet that the vitamins and minerals in that pre-workout are not going to go towards what the purpose is of amplifying their lift. It's going to be going towards filling those base nutrient needs.
Mm.
So that's kind of how, how protein works too, in the sense that if like we talked about, if you're not getting very much in, that the little bit that only that 10%, going towards creating new muscle, 10% of 50 grams is 5 grams, right? So it's
Yeah.
just not going to be doing too much. And that's another reason why adequate protein is so important. So what I like to say, if you are someone who is really wanting to put on muscle, aiming for 30 to 50 grams of protein per meal is a really good spot to be at. And that 50 might seem like a lot. That's okay. Start it. If you're not even getting 15 grams of protein per meal, start with a goal of getting 12 grams of protein per meal. And then once that feels doable and easy, then increase that number to maybe 20 grams of protein per meal. Um, you don't need to make these huge jumps. A little bit more is always going to be better. So that 30 to 50 gram range, I say, because it's what studies have shown us is optimal for muscle protein synthesis. So again, if you're experiencing muscle protein breakdown in the morning when you're doing, say, your morning lift, and then at practice in the evening, that's 2 times a day where that's happening, then let's experience muscle protein synthesis at breakfast, at lunch, at dinner. We have power to do that in our diet. So it's a really nice tool, to use.
So would you say, Brooke, that the timing at which we choose to eat makes a significant impact in how our body will respond to the food? Or is
Well,
it eat when you can?
yeah, I think that there's a balance with it, to a certain extent. When you are a busy high schooler or college student or just working adult, um, you know, if your goal is performance and building muscle, then you're, to a certain extent, you just really want to eat, right? You want to get good calories in. But if we want to do the work smarter, not harder, then
Mhm.
especially for protein, it really makes a difference to spread that out throughout the day. And there's people have done a lot of research on how important is it to get X amount of protein right after you work out. The only reason that it's super beneficial to slam a protein shake or something right after a workout is because you might forget if you don't. But as long as you're getting that same amount of protein per day, um, it doesn't necessarily matter if you do it right after your workout or not. If it helps you remember and you feel good doing that, awesome, do it. But it's really one of those things, 200 grams of protein per day is 200 grams of protein per day. But spreading it out is going to be optimal because our body's absorption of protein decreases a lot after, like, I think around 55 grams in one sitting. So, for you to be eating like, oh, I'm so proud, I'm eating 80 grams of protein for dinner, it's kind of foolish, because quality protein is expensive. And for you to, sit down and eat 80 grams of protein is going to be the awful experience. First of all, that's going to be a lot of food and not, you're going to have the meat sweats, not going to be pleasant. Um,
For
but
sure.
it's just not wise from the standpoint of, this is such a valuable macronutrient, as we've seen. We want to get the most out of it, so we want to be in that range that of optimal absorption.
Okay.
Yeah.
Love that. Thank you.
Yeah. So looking at a little bit more from a sports specific standpoint, um a lot of sports require regular changes in speed. So your acceleration, deceleration, and direction. So cutting motions. When the sports where that's happening, muscle protein turnover is especially high. Okay, so it's for a distance runner, you're not cutting, you're not changing direction and speed all the time. You're staying really consistent with it. Muscle protein turnover isn't going to be as high in a sport like that, but for basketball, football, your needs for protein are going to be higher. If practice and lifting end up on the same day, which I mean in high school, happens all the time, demands and damage are going to be high. So you're really going to want to, make sure that you're eating really good amount of protein on those days to recover from the muscle damage and soreness, because you don't want to go into competition unrecovered. So if you know that you have a really hard week of lifting and practice, then you got to make sure that you're leveling up on protein that week so that your body is recovered and ready to go, just to feel good, but then specifically for game day. So looking at 1.4 or more grams per kilogram of body weight, that's a really good spot to be at. Especially in the post competition period. And I mean, if if we're looking at that specifically, so for someone who is 160 pounds, to be at that amount, that's going to be like basically 100 grams of protein. So it's not a tremendous amount, but that's on the lower end of things. We would want to work on getting that number a little bit higher. But 100 grams of protein per day for someone who's 160 pounds is pretty dang doable. And then if you want to be in that 30 to 50 gram range each time you eat, that's about 33 grams of protein at breakfast, at lunch, and at dinner. So that's a really simple way to break it down. And again, that's not something that you need to be tracking every day. You just get used to, okay, if I have this many eggs at breakfast, I hit my protein goal. If I have this much, chicken or beef at lunch, I'll hit my protein, and you just get in the habit of that. Simple enough. So
Okay. So then you just plan your plates around the protein or
Mhm.
the high level goals that we're after.
Yep, exactly. And when people are struggling to hit a protein goal, I always just say, they want some kind of fancy thing to reach it. And I think it's as simple as add an ounce of protein to whatever you're having for dinner. So if you're used to having 4 ounces, then maybe start having 5 or 6 ounces. It's increasing the amount you're having in a serving, that really is helpful to people. And then, there's different snacks and things you can have throughout the day, but I really am a big fan of prioritizing having meals that are a little bit higher concentration of protein, so that you're easily getting in that quality muscle protein synthesis range. But looking at something that I think gets overlooked a lot of times when an athlete gets injured, we kind of just, we're like, oh, well, press pause on things until you're ready to go again. But so many athletes lose a lot of muscle when they're injured, and that doesn't need to be happening. It's really doable to maintain muscle while you're injured. You just need to be eating appropriately for it. So, there's actually an increased need for dietary protein when you're injured because, like we talked about, our muscles make up, or I mean our protein makes up our muscles and our tissues and our tendons. So when there's an injury and we're trying to recover that, we're going to need more protein because that's what those tendons and muscles and ligaments are made up of protein. So it makes sense that our protein need would be greater in those times of injury and recovery. So we want to make sure that we're getting adequate dietary protein to maximize any muscle loss, but then also make sure that you're recovering and supporting your muscle and tendons and ligaments and cartilage in that time. So your needs are going to go up. We talked about 1.4 grams per kilogram of body weight in general, But if we're looking at an injured athlete, looking closer to 2 to 2.4 grams per kilogram of body weight is going to be closer to what you'd need to maintain your muscle and to help support your recovery. So that's going to be that number, that range of the 2 to 2.4 is going to vary based on what you're still able to do. So if you're, it's going to be different for someone who like is on bed rest for a week versus someone who's going to physical therapy, 3 times a week. So if you're able to do a little bit more, then your need's going to be a little bit higher there. If you're really super limited and you're not doing much of anything, then staying around that 2 gram per kilo range is probably a pretty good spot to be at. So yeah, just making sure you're eating enough protein to support healing and repair, as well as supporting your muscle tissue. So those are the 2 things we want to think about with protein for the injured athlete. You want to think about supporting the healing and repair, and you want to think about supporting muscle tissue so that you're not going into, season whenever you're ready to start back up, 20 pounds lighter. Because we see that a lot, and it doesn't need to be happening. So you can save yourself so much energy when you're injured if you prioritize eating well.
100%. Can definitely attest to that one.
Yeah. So looking at protein sources, lean protein. So that's going to be protein that's lower in fat. This is a really good list here. So whey protein isolate, chicken, turkey breast, egg whites, venison's is lower in fat, higher in protein. So just a bunch of different examples there that, I'm sure that, Justin can make sure to share or, take a picture of it. But this is really helpful. Again, when I guess we didn't really talk about this too much, but when you're in that exercise window, so about 4 hours pre and post exercise, 4 hours, like not just a 4-hour window, it'd be an 8-hour window total. You want to keep fats a little bit lower, and you want to keep protein and carbohydrates higher, because fats are slow digesting. So when we're before or after a workout, we want super quick. And so we want to stick with more lean protein sources. So this is a good list for you if, you're eating before or after a lift. And again, it doesn't need to be perfect or practice. It doesn't need to be perfect. Like if mom made dinner and it's a fattier meal, that's totally fine. It's not gonna, you don't need to get stressed. It's gonna mess with your gains or recovery. But when we can control it a little bit more, keeping that, that meal around your training, a little bit leaner protein is going to be helpful, especially beforehand, just because if you're eating a really high fat meal beforehand, it can be really hard on your digestion. And we don't want any of your body's energy directed towards, digesting food when you should be practicing or you should be lifting. So we just don't want to divert that energy there. So keeping things, leaner pre-workout, probably going to make you feel better while you're training. Moderate fat protein sources, you're going to be looking at like drumsticks, pork chops, like an 85-15 beef, sockeye salmon, whole milk Greek yogurt, whole eggs, things like that. And these are all great options for just your regular meals. And then high fat protein. So this category here, I would say, is specifically helpful to anyone who is trying to be in a caloric surplus, because if we're talking protein sources that are higher fat, we're talking like double or triple the total calories. So, a chicken breast is going to have probably 0 to 2 grams of fat and 24 grams of protein in 4 ounces. While chicken thighs, they're going to be in the same 4 ounces. We're probably going to be looking at like 16 to 20 grams of fat and, 20 to 25 grams of protein. So, that is, if say it's 20 grams of fat right there, and we know that 1 gram of fat is 9 calories. Just from the fat in that, it's going to be 180 calories. Yeah. So, that is going to make a huge impact. So I think that for anyone who's trying to, or maybe you're really struggling to get to maintenance calories too, going for these higher fat protein sources are going to be really helpful for you, so that you're not needing to feel like you're eating such a high volume of food. Calorically dense foods mean that you don't need to eat quite as much of it in order to, get more calories in, basically. Whereas like a chicken breast, you could eat so much chicken breast and not really get that close to, what your calorie goals are. So taking advantage of those kind of things can be really helpful for anyone who's struggling to eat more.
Love that. Yeah. The breakdown of the lean, moderate to high. If you're like thinking, picking your plates to the week, or you're at the grocery store, picking from those lists are what I have found, because Brooke has shared this with me beforehand. I've seen it before, you guys. But just like as you're like, okay, what am I going to eat this week, or like whatever, picking from those lists and then your sides and stuff. It at least for me, that has helped planning out a week's
Yeah.
worth of meals.
Mhm. And the next macronutrient that we're going to look at are carbohydrates. So, this is our body's primary source of fuel for our body and our brain. And it can be a little bit of a controversial one. A lot of times people want to demonize carbohydrates, but they are such a valuable macronutrient for athletes. If you don't have enough fuel for your body and brain, you're not going to be performing well, period. And so it's vital for exercise and sports performance, because carbohydrate metabolism is the rate limiting factor in a lot of competitive events. So that means that when you are, you're at the getting close to the end of a game, or close to the end of practice or a heavy lift, and you're at that spot of really grinding and you're exhausted, who the athlete that's running out of glycogen first is the one who's going to hit a wall first, the one who's not going to be thinking as clearly and moving as well. You're going to get that's where you're going to the point where you hit a wall and you're feeling super exhausted and you can't really keep pushing at that same level of intensity. A lot of times that's when your body's, carbohydrate store is really low. So we really want to make sure that, and we'll talk about pre and intra and post carbohydrate consumption, but yeah, carbohydrates are your friend when it comes to athletic performance. They're stored mainly in the body, mainly as glycogen in your liver and in your muscle. So pre-workout carbohydrates, they provide opportunity to refill muscle glycogen stores. So it's really helpful if you're, before your game, like, 2 hours before you compete, making sure that you're eating a high carbohydrate meal, because we want your body to be primed up with ample carbohydrates going into whatever that event is. And their pre-workout carbohydrates also allow liver glycogen to be replenished. So we just all our primary goal with carbohydrates before working out is to make sure that you're not running out of carbohydrates during your athletic event. That's our body's that's our main goal there. If you have like a morning practice, it's important to, or a morning game, it's important to understand that while we're sleeping, up to 50% of our liver glycogen can be depleted. So because our bodies are still using all of these different fuel sources while we're sleeping to do different things, right? Our bodies use them for so much more than just performing in that athletic setting. So if you have a morning, you have a morning lift or morning game or something like that, then making sure to have a good meal the night before and the morning of is going to be really helpful for you to not hit a wall during that event. And then, oh yeah, great, perfect. We talked about that. So your pre-exercise meal is also able to reduce cognitive fatigue by reducing the increase in serotonin, which has been associated with feelings of tiredness, lethargy, and loss of motor coordination during exercise. So obviously, as someone when you're someone who is trying to perform at their best amount. We want to have everything as firing as well as it can. So that's going to be a really helpful thing to, I think, be aware of. And again, understanding what I eat really does matter when it comes to my sport. Pre-workout carbohydrates also help maintain blood glucose during the later stages of exercise when muscle glycogen stores become depleted, which we talked about a little bit already. So it basically will allow your competition intensity to be maintained for longer. So we want to be the athlete that is pushing the hardest for the longest period of time. Okay. That sets us apart. So, your pre-workout carbohydrate is going to play a role in your body's ability to do that. So your pre-exercise meal, just for a practical thing for you to take and use, your pre-exercise meal should contain between 1 to 4 grams per kilogram of body mass. Of body mass, and should be consumed 3 to 4 hours prior to competition. You don't want to, have this crazy amount of carbohydrates an hour before you compete. That's going to be a lot on your body, and you're not going to be able to digest all of that. And again, we don't want to go into competition with indigestion. So making sure that you give your body time with that is going to be super helpful. So 3 to 4 hours before, that's when you load up on a big pre-workout meal. And we have the stereotypical pasta before sporting events, and that's a great option. So it's actually one of those things that's good that people have gotten in the habit of that.
I love a pasta party.
Yeah, you got to. And then intra-workout carbohydrates. So these help support the limited glycogen storage pool. So we can do as much as possible beforehand to prep our bodies with, ample glycogen and carbohydrate. But, there's only so much that we can do, and everyone's capacity to store glycogen is going to be different. So if you're consuming some simple, easy carbohydrates during competition or during practice, that is also going to help spare glycogen stores in the liver. So we just always want to stay ahead of it. So it could be as simple as one of my favorite things to tell athletes to use is honey. Just keeping a thing of honey on the side and, taking a swig of that. It's natural. There's so many good things about honey in general, but it's such a good way to get quick glucose in a way that's not going to be like filling you up. It's not full of toxins. Like, there are so many different intra-workout things or sports drinks that have awful coloring and ingredients in them, and we want to stay away from those things. So if we can choose something that is affordable and natural, then I think that's a great way to go. So I really like honey as a sideline snack. I think that's a really easy one. It's fun for the team to have just a big thing of honey go around and take a squirt of that. So
I love it. Yeah, up at Grandma's Marathon, that was one of the options. Like, when they're handing out stuff, there was a company that's just like local raw honey, and I tried it once. And I was like, oh my gosh, it felt great. It felt great.
Right. Yeah. And I've seen the same thing for maple syrup too. There's different companies that'll sell like these packages of maple syrup for you to have. And that's, that'll do the job. You don't need something super expensive and fancy. Some simple sugar during your workout is going to help you to, keep going, keep pushing. So it's going to help you maintain your blood glucose. Hypoglycemia will lead to fatigue. And that's when your blood glucose is too low. So with that comes the inability to continue supplying muscle with adequate fuel. And when that happens, there's a reduced training intensity, and you might need to just cease exercise. So like if you see someone in some kind of in an athletic competition, a lot of times you'll see this if someone's finishing a race where they'll start kind of look like they're almost going to pass out or something. They're like getting super, look super lightheaded. They look like they're kind of losing control a little bit, starting to slump over. They're probably in that hypoglycemic state, and your body will just be like, nope, we're done. We don't have the fuel to do this. We're done. And so, I mean, in sports like basketball and football, I think that, you know, the chances of that are a little bit lower. But it's still something to be aware of, that, you know, you will have a reduced training intensity if you're, you know, if you don't have that ample amount of carbohydrates ready to go and use while you're competing. So carbs are key for maintaining high levels of exercise intensity and not hitting a wall. In the later stages of something like a long football game or basketball game or training session, our muscle glycogen, like we've said, becomes depleted, and blood glucose plays a critical role in allowing exercise to continue. So carbohydrate requirements during exercise can be achieved through a combination of solids, semi-solids, and fluids, supposing that they can be used by the muscle at a similar rate. So what that means is just, if you can use whatever you want to, whatever feels good for you and your body. So maybe you're someone who responds really well to bananas intra-workout. Great. Someone else might be like, that's way too much, messes with my guts. I don't like it. You know, maybe you need to do something that is, you know, a little like is more of a liquid or a fluid. And so I think that so much of it is really just figuring out what your body responds well to and going with that. But solids can be more difficult to digest just because, you know, chewing and enzymatically difficult to break down compared to fluids. So when we are looking at carbohydrate sources, there's a couple considerations. So we want to look at the macronutrient profile. For example, we don't want something that's really high in fiber because that's going to slow down digestion. And for what we're talking about here, we want quick fuel. So anything that's going to slow that down isn't going to be ideal. And then we also want to make sure we're not choosing carb sources that are high in fat, because like we talked about, that's going to slow things down too. We want something that our body is able to quickly use, and making sure it's something that you know you digest well. So if you know you don't respond well to something, don't do it. Even if, you know, someone says that like rice cakes are a really good option for you. If you don't respond well to that, then don't do it. Choose things that you are familiar with, that your body's used to. Before a game or competition specifically is not the time to introduce a new food. I always tell people on competition day, you want things to be as normal as possible. You want to stick with things that you know that your body has experience using before a workout, that you know you respond well to. So rice cakes are one of those options that's really simple for people a lot of the times. There's no fiber in it, no fat in it. It has a high glycemic index, where something like oatmeal is more of a complex carbohydrate with protein and fiber, making it slower glycemic index and slower digesting. So that's not to say oatmeal is bad. Oatmeal is more of a nutrient dense food, but when we're talking about optimal before a competition, something like that rice cake might respond a little bit better with you. So when we look at carb metabolism during exercise, we use fats for energy during times of rest or low intensity. And we use carbohydrates, like we talked about, during times of high intensity. So as exercise intensity increases, your body begins to shift more towards carbohydrates for fuel. And then it begins using more muscle glycogen. So when we reach those high exercise intensity levels, glycogen and circulating glucose become the major contributors of energy. Whereas right now, Justin and I are just sitting down. Our bodies are using fats for energy. So when we continuing to look at carb metabolism during exercise, fatigue starts to hit when glucose becomes depleted and gets too low. So we can no longer meet the demands of the exercising muscle. And you can see the impact on the brain is major. Poor decision making, slower reaction times, enhanced perception of effort. So you feel like you're working harder than normal. When we look at post-workout carbohydrates, we want those to be replenishing the carb stores that were depleted during training. Okay, so amount of carbohydrate consumed and timing is something to be aware of. Most evidence suggests that around 1 to 1.1 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight per hour. It's kind of a mouthful, and something that if someone wants one-on-one coaching, that I can help them with, because that can feel a little bit more complicated. But it is pretty simple when you break it all down. It should be consumed within a few hours of completing an exercise or a competition. The closer, so this is different than protein in the sense that the closer that you can get to post workout with carbohydrates, the more quickly glycogen can be replenished. So when we talk about type of carbohydrates consumed, similar to what we just mentioned, we want simple. We don't want as much of those complex carbohydrates, things like rice, pasta, bagels, English muffins, the fruits that are have a higher glycemic index, like watermelon, pineapple, mango. We would stay away more from for things like berries that are higher in fiber, and go for these kind of fruits. So figs, raisins, dried fruit, something that is going to have a higher amount of sugar in it, or glucose in it. So when it comes to game day nutrition, game day nutrition doesn't start on game day. It starts 24 to 48 hours prior with something called carb loading. So if your Saturday, say you have a game on Saturday at noon, that means that your game day nutrition starts Thursday or Friday at noon. And you could play around with what works well for you. Maybe you feel better when you start that process on Thursday. Maybe you feel better when you start that process on Friday. So much of this stuff is person to person. So figure out what makes sense for your life, what's doable for you, and what makes you feel the best, because ultimately that's what matters. So carb loading is used to increase glycogen stores above their normal peak capacity. So our muscle glycogen stores are relatively limited, but glycogen concentrations can be enhanced by up to 50% by increasing carb intake 24 to 48 hours prior to competition. So that's a huge increase, up to 50%. So we want to look at 8 to 10 grams per kilogram of body mass per day, in combination with a reduced training load, which is naturally going to happen. If you have a big game on Saturday, you're not going to probably be going super hard in the weight room or in practice Thursday and Friday. So optimally for carb loading, your training load comes down a little bit, and then you are jacking way up the amount of carbs you're consuming. 8 to 10 grams per kilogram of body mass is a lot of carbs. So you don't need to start that aggressively. If that's way too much for you, then do something that is realistic, and again, see how your body responds to that, and then maybe bring that number up a little bit next time. But this is about you feeling the best in competition that you can feel. So it's important to try different things and figure out what you need personally. For team sports like basketball that last more than 90 minutes, carb loading can enhance performance by 2 to 3% and extend time to fatigue by 20%. So when, again, as you get to higher levels too, you want that edge, you want to stand out, and things like this are going to help you do that. Things like this are really going to make a practical difference. So when we're implementing carb loading, we want to limit fat intake because we want to keep overall calories from getting too high. If you're bringing your carbohydrates up like 200 grams above normal, and then you start eating more fats too, then calories are getting a little bit out of control there. So we just want to make sure that carb loading it's not about overall as much calorie loading. It's about the carbs. So you want to bring those carbs way up, but that doesn't necessarily mean fats and protein are getting way jacked up too. It's focusing on carbs, which again, out of all the macronutrients, is probably the most simple one for you to eat more of easily, just because things like bagels and fruit are super easy and accessible, so they're more convenient. and we want to be striving for energy balance, because we don't want to be, you know, when we're carb loading, we don't want to be gaining unnecessary weight. So that's why we want to make sure that we're keeping, you know, our fats relatively, um, relatively, you know, moderate or lower during that time. Uh, Using liquid carbohydrate sources can be super helpful if you're someone, maybe you're tall, your weight's a little bit higher, so your, you know, your carb loading is going to be a little bit more intense than someone who's smaller than you. Using things like quality juices are going to be really nice and easy to hit your carbohydrate goal, again, without you feeling like you're eating all day long. So, and that can help with feelings of being bloated or digestion and whatever as well. So, I hope all of that information is helpful. I know that, you know, it can be a lot, and there's a lot to all of it, but take some of the things that stuck out to you that seem super practical to you, and try them out. If you need extra support, I am, you know, happy to connect with you. Justin's able to, you know, share my information too. So yeah, I hope that this is helpful in helping you to, you know, eat for your sport. And yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brooke. We appreciate the time. And yeah, if you are out there watching, season 2 of AGB begins January 14th. If you're looking for accountability group, someone to plug into, right? That's what we're here for. So, Brooke, thank you so much. This information is going to be put to great use. We'll chop it all up. But appreciate you all tuning in. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be hearing from Brooke again soon.